Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much. My name is Florencia. I'm with the Spokesman's Office. I'd like to welcome you to this briefing on the Secretary General's policy brief on COVID-19 in the urban world. We have with us today the Executive Director of UN Habitat, Ms. Maimunah Mohd Sharif, and the UN Development Program Administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner. They will have some introductory remarks, and then there will be time for Q&A. I just need to note that Mr. Steiner needs to leave about 8:55, so we'll try to make as much time for your questions as possible. You should all have received the embargoed materials about an hour ago. And I just want to remind you that all the materials, and including this briefing, they're all embargoed until Tuesday, 28th of July, 1 minute after midnight. So that's a few hours away from now, and this is New York time. So it's 1 minute after midnight tonight, New York time. As to how the Q&A goes, if you're not familiar with WebEx, I will explain very quickly. Please pay attention. There's a little chat bubble in your menu at the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat bubble. If you press there, you'll see that on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll have the chat. And there's a little menu at the bottom that says send to, and there's a little arrow. And that arrow should say all panelists. Like you can click on the arrow and choose all panelists. If you don't choose all panelists, I won't be able to see that you have a question. So the way it will work is please on the chat, tell me your name, your media outlet, letting me know that you have a question. And at the end of the remarks, I will call on the people that have told me they have questions, and you'll be able to ask your question via audio and video if you have. We would love to see you. And I will send a little message just so everyone knows I'm using the chat. Okay, so I think we're set to go. Ms. Sharif, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Florencia. Thank you very much for the introduction. UN and UNDP Administrator, my friend Achim Steiner, representative of the media. Thank you for attending this press conference today for the launch of the Secretary General's latest policy brief on COVID-19 in an urban world. COVID-19 is an urban crisis. More than half of the world population live in urban areas, and some 90% of all reported COVID-19 cases are in cities and towns. It also highlights the necessity to take urgent action to ensure cities remain resilient to absorb future challenges related to climate change and migration. So the Secretary General's policy brief is a powerful instrument to put us on the right path to deal with the crisis and also to seize the opportunity to do things differently in the recovery so that we can create a greener, healthier, and more resilient cities. The transformative potential of urbanization towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be lost. Equally, this moment cannot be missed. So local governments are the frontline responders to this crisis, and indeed to all others. So local government networks such as UCLG, C40, ICLE, the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, and many represented in the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments have all created platforms to share solutions and lessons learned as we go forward. So their mobilization and their solutions has been very impressive. The policy brief draws on these positive examples and outlines immediate and long-term action in three vital areas. First, tackling inequalities and the development gaps. Second, strengthening the capacities of local actors, particularly the local governments. Third, working towards a recovery that is green, inclusive, and resilient. What we talk about tackling inequalities. This pandemic has further exposed structural inequalities which divide people by income, service access, race, migration status, and the quality of air they breathe in our urban societies. So COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable who are unable to protect themselves against the virus because of where they live. Staying at home, physical distancing and hand washing are seen as a key preventive measures. But however, nearly 1.8 billion people live in inadequate housing, overcrowding, slums, and slum-like conditions, or are even homeless. Some are even homeless and with lack of access to clean water, leaving them at a high risk of exposure to COVID-19. Less than 20% of people in Nairobi's informal settlements have household water connection. But this is not just an issue in the global south. In London, per capita infection rates in poorer boroughs have been 3 times higher than the more affluent areas. So the urban poor often has no access to society safety nets, leaving them at risk of eviction or having their services disconnected as their incomes drop. The longer the pandemic goes on, the deeper they risk being pushed into poverty and insecurity. So the Secretary General's policy brief set out a number of key actions to tackle inequalities. So short-term measures such as access to safe shelter and moratorium on eviction are essential. However, fundamental policy shift and investment in adequate housing, slum upgrading, public housing are needed in the longer term. Number 2, strengthening the capacities of local actors, particularly local government. The pandemic has shown the crucial role of local government as a frontline responders, but has also demonstrated the needs more than ever for a strong alignment and collaboration between national, regional, and local governments. So national governments must ensure in their stimulus packages that local government and public service providers can keep the cities functioning at a time where they see their revenue decline. In Africa, local government face losses of up to 60% of their revenue. Then we have to work towards a green, inclusive, and resilient recovery. Let's not forget that this health crisis comes at a time when we also face a climate emergency. The pandemic is far from over. Experts say the peak is still to come in Africa. The second wave are likely in other places. So any recovery efforts needs to put resilient buildings against all hazard at the center. The pandemic makes it clear that human and planetary health are closely connected. Recovery does not only need to be resilient, but also green and inclusive. Sound urban planning, a focus on circular economy, public space, and sustainable mobility must be central to our plan going forward. Many city authorities have reacted quickly to provide solutions to all these fronts. Seattle banned eviction for non-payment of rent. Local government in Bogota, Montreal, Vienna, and Barcelona have made emergency housing available. Quito is working with local business to expand social assistance initiative to migrant residents. There is a significant uptake of biking and walking as safe alternative to public transport and car use, prolonging the improvement in air quality during the lockdowns. We have seen bike lanes being expanded and widened, and short-term street closure and temporary bike lanes in Mexico, and street converted into pedestrian zone in Tel Aviv and New York. This effort needs to be applauded, but more importantly, they need to be sustained and they need to be scaled up. So in conclusion, our aim to achieve the SDGs, overcome the climate emergency, and manage future pandemic is intrinsically linked to the future of cities. Density is not the problem. Overcrowding, lack of access to public services, and air quality are. In a world where telecommuting and online retail are becoming a new normal, more than ever, we need well-designed cities, neighborhood and buildings that keep us safe, allow for solidarity and inclusion in a green and healthy environment. The policy brief has benefited from a strong collaboration across several UN agencies and provides a framework for more integrated support to member states and cities. So in this complex crisis, more than ever, we need to act and deliver as one. We will contribute our urban expertise to the work of other agencies in the UN system. Again, I'm delighted to be here with UNDP's Administrator Achim Steiner as our partnership in key to this. The brief is a strong call for action. If we want to leave no one, no place, no local government behind, we will need to put global, national, and local solidarity front and center. Thank you very much. Over to you, Florencia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Steiner, over to you.
Thank you very much, Florencia. And Maimunah, it's very good to join you this morning on the occasion of the launch of this Secretary General's brief on COVID-19 in an urban world. And as head of the United Nations Development Program, it is not surprising that I would be very pleased and proud to be sitting here with you in supporting the Secretary General's launch, because as you already pointed out, we're talking about more than half of humanity this morning. Half of humanity living in the cities of the world that account for about 90% or 80% of global GDP. So whichever way you look upon it, from a concentration of people, from the particular issues that you just raised, also around vulnerability and risk, but also from the perspective of economic recovery, what happens next in our cities around the world is fundamental to, first of all, being able to cope with COVID-19, but also to conceive of a way forward, of a recovery of a building forward better. 1 billion slum dwellers around the world. You just ended your remarks, Maimunah, by highlighting what the Secretary General also points to, that it is in the cities that we find this pandemic has really put a spotlight on inequality. We can live together. We can live together in condensed places. That's what cities are all about. They are efficiencies. They draw people in. They create jobs and employment. But then the reality of living in a city is so highly unequal that COVID-19 has exposed these fractures in our societies more than ever. And you have already alluded to some of them in what you have presented. A particular aspect that we in the United Nations Development Program clearly focus on is also the fact that, together with our sister agency ILO, is to recognize that in many developing countries, cities are also the place where most people have their livelihoods in terms of gainful employment, but that employment is largely in the informal sector. So the economic impact of the shutdown measures, as well as the health crisis of COVID-19 that is happening in parallel, have created extraordinary pressures. Inequality is in danger of not only compromising our ability to contain the virus, it is also sowing more and more tension and economic despair amongst our midst. And here, let me just share a very personal impression. I live in Brooklyn, and just yesterday, walking through the neighboring street here where all the small shops are in my neighborhood, I was shocked to actually see how many shops have shut, have actually given up, have gone bankrupt. I would say in a block of 50 shops, it was well over 10, possibly 15 shops that clearly have closed their doors, not just for the duration of COVID. They're emptying their shops, they have gone bankrupt, they cannot survive. And it points to a particular need that the Secretary General's brief also highlights. Local governments have enormous opportunities with their regulatory powers, but also with their means of identifying who are the most vulnerable, to look at possible stop of eviction orders for the moment. We need to find ways in which we make not only the poor pay for this crisis, and that those who own property, in a sense, are able to simply throw people out. We have instances also of utilities in many countries continuing to collect and shutting off supplies of electricity, and doing so despite the fact that it is quite clear that people are not in a position to pay. This is where local government is, as Maimunah put it just now, the frontline responder. It is a critical part of government's overall capacity to act. And we are in UNDP, together with our UN sister agency, but particularly under the leadership of UN Habitat, very much focusing also on how we can maintain the business continuity between central government response instruments and those of local government, which are ultimately the ones who most quickly can stand up both policies but also programs and support mechanisms to assist particularly those who are unable to help themselves in this situation through no fault of their own. Thirdly, let me also point to a key area that I think will be at the heart of trying to understand how we can not only stabilize the situation, but also to begin to conceive of a recovery, investment, and the Secretary General's brief and Maimunah Sharif just pointed out, an investment into a build forward better, into a green economy, into an economy that also recognizes that the investments we will make now in the next few weeks and months could either contribute significantly to reducing inequality, reducing vulnerability and risk, or amplifying it further with all the consequences that will have for our societies. The UN is already heavily engaged in socioeconomic assessments and recovery plans in over 100 countries right now. And we are looking also very carefully at the financing opportunities and options for countries. The integrated national financing frameworks that are currently being undertaken in over 60 countries point also to the importance of aligning public investments at central government level, at local government level, but also with business and the private sector. In many places right now, it is governments that are actually stepping in with public funding to stabilize the private sector. It is critical that business and private sector, and particularly corporations with the resources, rapidly invest at local level into a stabilization of the economy, looking at their supply chains, being able to create short-term employment and gainful livelihood opportunities. And here the rebuilding of our economies with a greener trajectory, but also with a strong focus on digital connectivity. It is in the cities that perhaps the disconnect and the contrast between those who can afford broadband connections, who can have their children stay at home and continue study, and those who have no option, no education, no resources, and soon no ability to buy food, will be exposed as perhaps the most active driver of inequality right now. Therefore, digital connectivity, providing broadband connectivity in cities, into the slums, into the kind of households that actually need them in order to maintain their social distancing, who can run businesses very often also from their home, if they're given the opportunity, maybe another area that needs attention. Let me end by saying that in that way that we conceive of cities and the people living in it as the backbone of our both national economic recovery, but also as a top priority ensuring that inequalities do not worsen, that people do not lose the very savings with which they have built up their businesses. And again, let me remind you, 70 to 80% of people earn their livelihoods in the informal sector in developing countries. More than half, often 60, 70, 80%, do not have social security, social safety mechanisms. This is why UNDP also proposed last week that governments need to look at the option of temporary basic incomes as a way of potentially stabilizing the fate of those living on the poverty line or below it. With these remarks, let me just say that we are very proud to work with UN Habitat and our sister agencies in bringing the world's attention to the centrality of addressing COVID-19 in cities, understanding the different impacts it is having on populations within the city, and appealing to all those that this is a moment of solidarity that does begin at the local level and extends to the nation and ultimately to the world as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we have time for questions. Please let me know via the chat if you have any questions. I don't see anyone right now. And if you've tried the chat and I'm not seeing it, please just, okay, here we go. Evelyn, please go ahead. Evelyn? Hi, Evelyn.
I see the question in the chat, and I'm sure my colleague,
Okay.
May I answer?
Yes, let me just read it out loud. So from Evelyn Leopold, Mr.
Yes.
Steiner, how do you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Evelyn, please go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Steiner, good morning. How do you attract investments? And is there an example of your intervention in any city, whether it's Nairobi or any other place? Is there an example of where there has been positive improvement since the virus began?
Well, I will let my colleague Maimunah in a moment give you some further examples, but certainly there are 2 or 3 areas that I would point to right now. The first one has been in the ability of particularly technology companies that in many parts of the world have, in a counterintuitive way, perhaps been beneficiaries of this crisis because our reliance on digital platforms and broadband connectivity has grown so much. It is in these companies that we see opportunities, and some of the biggest names in the technology world are part of work that we, for example, as UNDP and Hackster do with Amazon Web Service, Arduino, Avnet, Edge Impulse, Google, Microsoft, just to mention a few, and launched a Detect and Protect challenge also with the private sector. But it is in the ability of governments to trace and track the pandemic as it expands, to be able to get access to the possibilities of expanding broadband. Here we are looking at both the ability of government to perhaps deal with emergency programs in providing basic infrastructure while companies expand and extending the reach of digital infrastructure. We obviously are also looking at new models of being able to run markets. It is critical, and for instance, in Uganda, we have been experimenting, in a number of other countries in Africa, on how to provide local market traders who are not able to operate in the market to sell their produce, basically establish a digital platform to connect them to consumers in the capital cities at least. And so ordering online becomes feasible, and you suddenly jump into an entirely new era of local market economies. But we're talking also at much more significant approaches, and I think here the integrated national financing frameworks that I mentioned that the UN is currently working with governments in over 60 countries is a way in identifying short-term opportunities. And here I'm in particular thinking also about renewable energy. There are too many people still in too many developing countries without access to electricity, no clean cooking facilities. This is another frontier. These are shovel-ready opportunities. They can create jobs, and above all, they can create an impulse, because access to electricity is a driver of development. Let me perhaps turn the question to Maimunah also with some of the local government insights that she has.
Thank you very much, Achim. Thank you very much, Evelyn, for the questions. I think there are, during the webinars that we have with the local government, with the mayors, for example, a city like Yokohama supported the payment of rents, and where Addis Ababa reduced the rent of public housing, and Chicago, San Francisco, Paris, and others proposed rental payment. Barcelona allocated emergency housing in vacant housing unit for people at the social risk. So many cities has expanded access to water in the deprived neighborhood. For example, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Lima, Costa Rica, Freetown, Nairobi, Nakuru, and Dhaka, and other partial exemption on water, sanitation, and urban waste tariffs. And all this action, I think, is to also to bring back the local economy, to bring back the domestic economy, because it's of the lockdown of the international movement. This is also, to me, to a certain extent, give the positive impact to the people on the ground, and to attract the investment, the local investment, and to also to attract the local, the informal sector. So this is also, for example, like in Malaysia. So we open up the borders and trying to take back the investment in a way that infrastructure investment, and also the domestic. Now I think the outlook is a bit changing into the recovery. They do step by step, and by attracting the investment, domestic investment. Then they go to the middle term and the long term to get back as the times as time pass. So this is my answer to Evelyn. I hope that is okay with you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. And now I will read, we have quite a few questions, so I will read them out. So question from Coach Gilbert. He asks, with a city like Nairobi, what interventions would you propose for mobility and going green, and also to curb air pollution from the traffic? How can authorities seize the opportunity to correct these wrongs? And finally, I have from Anesu Elizabeth. How do you tend to initialize these local market trading, especially in developing countries where at the moment people hardly even have income to facilitate the buying of data to be able to engage online? So,
Lawrence, Maimunah, would you permit me to just give one or two examples, because I then have to unfortunately step back because they will be waiting for me on another call. I just thought I would seize this opportunity, and I know it may seem a little bit ambitious, but thinking of Nairobi, for those of you who may know Nairobi, may not know it, one of the enormous improvements in local transport for particularly poorer people in recent years has been the arrival of the motorbike. It's the boda boda, the taxi on which you ride on the back of a taxi motorcycle driver. First of all, certainly road safety is still a big consideration that needs to be addressed here, but these motorcycles today are all basically petrol-driven motorcycles, yet for the same price, these motorcycles also exist as electric motorcycles. One way to reduce pollution could be to put the infrastructure in place in order to make mobility, cleaner mobility in a city like Nairobi, where literally tens of thousands of people are relying on these local transport means, onto a new pathway. It's not an additional cost in terms of the motorcycle, but government and a private sector partner need to invest in the infrastructure in order to run such a system. It's just one example. And I think the second one I want to just point to again, I think it is critically important that local government look particularly at a temporary regulatory measure to stop people being thrown out of their homes. We are now looking not just at very poor people, we're looking at working class people in inverted commas, lower middle class people literally being forced to vacate their homes because of the COVID-19 shutdown. Sooner or later, these kinds of developments will become socially explosive. We need to find solutions, temporary solutions that step in here. And the city of New York is a good example where basically evictions have been suspended by the city government for the duration of, I think, the remainder of this year. And this is, yes, very harsh on those who need to collect rent because they may be paying mortgages. But between an existential ability to have a home and have none, and spreading the risk across those who are property owners, I think city governments are in an extremely strong position to address what is a highly vulnerable and rapidly growing risk. With that, I beg your forgiveness if I sign off and leave you in the hands of Maimunah, who in any case is the true advisor to the SG on today's policy brief. Thank you so much.
thank you very much, Achim. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Sharif, I just wanted to let you know a few other questions. If you could talk about any specific measures for underdeveloped countries in Africa. This is Ms. Elena Lenta from the Lusa News Agency. She's saying that I understand recommendations should be implemented in any part of the world, but not all the countries have the chance. Some African countries are dealing with a political crisis. So how can you ensure that the governments will follow these recommendations? And she's asking if you maybe can give an example related to Guinea-Bissau.
Thank you very much for that questions. Yeah, I would like to add to the questions. Apart from this, is also from the question on the Nairobi question just now, that I will link it to this question as an example. Yeah, if you can allow me. For example, like in Nairobi, we know that is the public transport is one of the main way of people to move from one area to another area. And then it's also now that you can see that in Nairobi, there are already people walking along the street. If you are very familiar with Nairobi, there are so many people are already walking along the street. And what we do is that is the needs of having the what they call it, the bicycle lane and also the walkway. We had one example in Nairobi when we turned the busy road in Lutuli Street into a more pedestrianization, and the people appreciate it, and they want more. And this is also trying to reduce the air pollution in that areas. And we're trying also to work together with the people, with the community, and shift from walking to biking. But this needs to be sustained. And at the same time also is require more on the public spaces. And our suggestion been discussed at the technical committee at the Kenyan, by the Kenyan government. And when they discuss, they also form up to work together with the community, to work together with the youth. For example, like in terms of the public space policy, the waste-wise, our UN Habitat waste-wise city campaign, and we go to our line ministry, and we talk to them. We have to form a committee, and we explain to them the benefit of having this, and they believe in it. Then they trust us, and they implement it. And now I think that is in terms of the waste-wise city campaign, they even create employment to the youth sector. At the same time, the cities is clean. So I think this is the leadership and also the trust in our policy. So of course in Africa, we know that the reality is a limited capacities. At the same time, Africa also demonstrate the importance of the grassroots and community. So what we would like to do is that community resilience is the key, because at the community level, they know best the solution, the local solution. So this is one area that we look, and of course, global solidarity, like people like us and people like in the UN agencies and private sector, we need to work together with them. So one other area that we work is, even in Rwanda, we propose, and in Ethiopia, in terms of the work, even in Tanzania, and in other part of the world. So I think that we start with small project, and then they believe in it, and we scale up. So that's how we make the people understand and committed, and also trying to follow what we were trying to put up to them. Over to you, Florencia. Thank you.
Okay, we have two more questions. One I think is very related. This is from Nuran Kandil. She's saying is saying Egypt is shifting to using electric cars. What are measures that can be taken to reduce mobility emissions and impact on pollution in a city that is as crowded as Cairo? And I think you talked about that a little bit. And the next question is from Danielle Amara. Is the UN monitoring how the governments, especially in Africa, are implementing or using the support that you are giving them?
Thank you very much for that question. One as example of the Egypt, you mentioned about the mobility and also in terms of the reduce the crowd, the overcrowding, and the reduce in terms of pollution. I think what we need to do now is to look into all of us have the responsibility in terms of the innovation and creation, to look into the clean energy, to look into the clean mobility. And yes, they are looking into the electric, whether we can use solar, we can use even any other innovation. So I think this is important for us to continue working together with the private sector to see the best alternative. And at the same time, when you mentioned about the area that is in terms of the in Egypt, and also in the mobility, at the same time in terms of the pollution, I think this is very interconnected. So we need the integrated planning. We need the integrated way of doing things. We cannot do it ad hoc. So that's why in the UN we are going through together with Achim, together with UN Women, together with UNICEF, and as one UN to tackle the problem. UN Habitat alone, no. Monitoring, yes, we have the monitoring tools. We share together with the member state. We share together with the countries, and we also need to increase the capacity of the local government in implementing that. I think that's one of the area in the report to say that the capacity of the local government need to be relooked and need to be helped. Over to you, Florencia.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. If anyone else has a question, please let me know now. Okay. It seems that we're done. If there's anything else you'd like to add, Ms. Sharif, please go ahead.
Yes, I would like to see that this Secretary General policy guide on the on COVID-19 in an urban world. I think this is a very important instrument for us, not only for UN Habitat, not only for the UN agencies, but for everybody to read and to help us to move forward and try to build and to recover the situation at the local government, at the not only the and also at the community level and the people together. So here, solidarity and togetherness is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And just a reminder that everything will be embargoed until 1 minute after midnight tonight, New York time. And we will send a recording for you so that you can have the embargo press briefing as well.
So one more, Florencia.
Yes.
The urban data will be available at the data.unhabitat.org if you want to see. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And nice having all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.